Hi everyone. In this video, I am going to talk about respect in the workplace environment as well as understanding what is true respect and what is falsely perceived as respect in the world, which needs to shift and change, not simply because I'm going to present some cases related to my personal work experiences to help understand this respect in the workplace related um, topic. But the reason why it is important is without respect and without understanding the role of different people we work with in our professional life, you do not build a social system, work system, any system where right conditions for that system to thrive and people involved in that system to function gracefully can exist in the world. So if you do not respect your co-workers and or your co-workers don't respect you, and if you do not understand the relevance of each piece of the workforce that is involved in providing you the supportive work life, then what starts happening is you will start building a tower of a house of cards like situation where you're working with incompetent people, disrespectful people, people not mindful of the work that they are supposed to do, people not aware consciously about the work they have to do in the present, as well as you cannot ever build a system that will work with problems of the future, because this is where currently medical systems globally are failing. I'm addressing this. It's not simply where medical systems are failing, this is also where healthcare systems are failing, this is also where families are failing, this is also where financial systems are failing. And while they are failing, the false respect for monetary success in all of these fields of work or in personal life is the reason why people fail to see when incompetent people are there in their life, when disrespectful situations are created in their life that do not really support what that situation is supposed to resolve, what that individual level or professional level work with another person, coexistence with another human being is supposed to resolve. And all of this might sound like mumbo jumbo or confusing because I'm talking about a multi level interconnected topic. And based on my own personal experiences, I'm going to try explaining what I mean in this video. And if you have the patience to listen to my long videos, and the long videos are needed for those people who have no clue about the way in which they are messing up the future of the world simply by staying ignorant about their own sphere of influence regarding the work that they do, and simply by propagating a system that tries to reward incompetency or reward a particular social image versus true competency and true mindfulness and care in any aspect of work that anyone does. For example, and this is the problem currently on earth right now, that there are people who only look at the superficial profit someone is bringing to their organization, who look at the superficial sociable contact someone is bringing in their organization or family life. And both of these are actually the toxic masculine and toxic feminine energy related traits that drives the world to assume that if someone in their masculine energy brings in a lot of profit, brings in a lot of money to an organization, to a family life, they have done their job of being a responsible and respectful, sociable citizen of a family as well as of a company. Same way, if a feminine energy holding person brings a lot of social connections, is able to create a lot of charm a lot of people into making everyone believe that their family life is perfect, or their work connections, they're building a lot of work connections. Again, that is a false paradigm. It is a false paradigm that is respected by many people, but both of these seemingly and very much propagated respect showing characteristics are really not the reason why the world actually thrives and survives and is able to get through many challenging phases of any individual's life, any company's life, any true development or evolution of a personal level or professional level cannot actually really exist meaningfully if only these two conditions were present in people's personal life or work life. And I've had a problem and challenge with both these toxic, these are both actually toxic masculine energy supporting and enabling, and toxic feminine energy enabling qualities. And again, understand this, when I'm talking about toxic masculine and toxic feminine traits, toxic masculine trait of gain and praise and glory and rewards and money becomes toxic when you do not know when you have to win and when you need to lose. When losing something is equally necessary, destroying something is equally necessary, stepping up to do the right thing is necessary, ethical thing is necessary, moral thing is necessary. That's when it is a balanced masculine trait and not a toxic masculine trait. Similarly, with the feminine trait, if you're only using, and again, it's irrespective of gender, all of us, including me, has both masculine and feminine energy in me, and that's why in order to be on my balanced masculine and feminine energy, I have to understand what is a balanced toxic masculine, balanced masculine, what is a toxic masculine. I have to also understand what is a balanced feminine, what is a toxic feminine. If I do not have an understanding, I cannot strive towards balancing myself, and by making mistakes only we end up learning the lessons, sometimes the deeper lessons related to what is a balancing energy in us. But if we don't learn from our mistakes, if we don't admit our mistakes, if we don't admit the places where we are flawed, or if we are not ready to admit where someone else is flawed, you cannot solve the problems that the world starts creating and enabling when a great number of people are in their toxic masculine and feminine energy. And currently, globally, people are in a huge chunk of people, at least in my personal life and professional life, I've met great chunks of people who are in their toxic masculine and feminine energies. So, which is why I'm making this video, because it's a very crucial aspect of determining where our earth will go towards. If Because if earth has more toxic masculine and feminine energy holding people on earth, that is when earth life self-destructs itself. And first the self-destruction happens at the personal level, then it happens at a family level, then it happens at a social level, then it manifests at a work level, then it manifests at a community level, and then at a country specific level, and then global level as well. And global level problems are, that's why, cropping up in the world, related to wars, related to socio-economic warfare, related to healthcare related challenges, all of which have cropped up in the last 4 years. But people who are toxic masculine and feminine energy, they also support, because of their, if you see, let's say you are a doctor and you are generating, your hospital is generating a lot of money because that doctor is doing some work that is causing the doctor to get hundreds of patients or millions of dollars worth of money for that hospital. But does that mean that doctor is a competent doctor, is a doctor of the present and a doctor of the future simply because he's able to generate money? So that's where the toxic masculine trait has started happening, or even toxic feminine trait has started happening, because just because someone very charmingly or efficiently or monetarily is able to generate a lot of patient population to follow them or come to them for some intervention, doesn't necessarily mean they are doing the right thing. And which is where there are so many hospitals. And if you have found some, I have studied healthcare administration, so there are some books by Atul Gawande and studies done by him that have shown all these problems related to these toxic masculine feminine traits in the medical practice in US, where they found in a state of Texas, they had studied two different medical systems with similar population group, but in one medical system, that medical system was charging patients a lot of money for many procedures. So, and while that organization is being considered as a top ranking organization globally for many reasons, and it does tend to be the richer organization, the true healthcare delivery was not getting delivered in that organization that was generating a lot of money. True healthcare delivery was happening in fact in the other organization which wasn't charging a lot of money. But what was the criteria for the true delivery? I don't know about his papers because that part I didn't study in my coursework. But from a personal perspective angle of understanding what is true healthcare delivery and what is fake delivery, this much I can say about anything related to healthcare or anything related to any other practices or that provides service to humans, that provides a product to humans. So as a consumer also, as well as a healthcare practitioner, the key thing that all of us should have awakened to by now, after having consumed in our 20, 30, 40, 50 years of life as a consumer, what is a quality product or quality service? So what is a quality product and service? A quality product and service is something that actually offers you what you are seeking. So let's say I go to, and those studies only related to two hospital comparisons. If I have, let's say, cancer, and I have gone to hospital A and hospital B, and I am an average middle class person or even a low socioeconomic status person, because that is where actually quality of work shows up. Not when you are a rich person. When you are a richer person or more privileged person, the quality of work actually declines when you are in that comfort zone of life. So if I am in an uncomfortable zone in life where I have limited financial access, where I have less financial access, and I go to two organizations, and in one organization I spend $100,000 or end up getting into debt simply to investigate what was wrong, or after investigation the treatments were really expensive and the long time consuming treatments such that I had job loss or things like that, and someone went into debt. Is that providing quality patient care? Yes, you may have given them maybe the best, most luxurious treatment, and offered them the best diagnosis related machines and medications, everything you might have given that are like considered top notch by the rich and elite. But it was not quality care because someone went into debt, someone who had maybe only $30,000 salary a year, and they are now in because of their health conditions, they went into $500,000 related debt or something. Can they pay it off easily in a few years? No, it will take them a long time to pay off that debt. But if that same person with a 30,000 salary in one hospital, they are charging them $500,000 over a period of a year for their healthcare stuff, and in the other hospital their diagnosis didn't charge them even $5,000. The doctor was really truly competent, the set of medical professionals were truly competent, that from simplest measures they could easily detect whether this patient has a certain disease. They didn't rely on expensive machines or expensive diagnostic tests. That by itself could cut down the cost of healthcare for that patient by maybe $100,000. And then the treatment also, they did it in such a way keeping in mind that the patient has a lower salary, so they sought out a treatment plan that will be workable for the patient given their financial status. That is the hospital who's actually providing quality care, meaningful care, because they have provided the patient access to care. Now, in that hospital, in the next hospital, the person with a 30,000 salary who went there, got their treatment, and was able to achieve that treatment within just $100,000, then within 3 years, 5 years, they are still going to be able to pay off that debt slowly over time. If they had at least some moderate insurance, their insurance also might be helpful in providing that care. But if they go to the $500,000 charging hospital for all the medical costs, healthcare costs, there sometimes, and this is the reason why insurances exist in US, many people falsely presume that insurances are creating barriers. Yes, insurances also have a profit motive in whatever they are doing, so I understand questioning insurances isn't the problem zone, but where right criticism of insurance should be done or the wrong criticism of insurance should be done is something I learned from my work experiences in healthcare, both as a pharmacist as well as where I had to deal with insurance issues many a times in US, as well as later on while as a healthcare administrator, that I understood the other end of the insurance narrative, which is we all have to hold a balanced narrative about why insurances are necessary in countries like US or any other country right now, because there's no right legal system oversight about meaningless care, thoughtless care, care where doctors simply do not look at the patient's social status, socioeconomic status, health status, the implications of whatever they recommend to the patient, how it will affect their access to care. Because sometimes, let's say, go to in one hypothetical, there are, and this is not a hypothetical situation, this is actually the reality of many Americans or many people globally as well, not just in America. It's just more prominently studied in America because American system at least has the capacity to see where they are going wrong and then course correct when they have gone wrong. Whereas while the same level of problems exist globally in other countries, they do not have the right professionals to sit and work through and analyze what is exactly going wrong with their system, where they need to course correct. And those are the systems where eventually they end up failing. Any country which had massive COVID cases, or any country where a massive number of COVID deaths also happened, even any section of a very developed country where certain cities had a lot of COVID deaths, these are all places where actually healthcare delivery was failing because they are not looking at the patient perspective. They are only looking at the bare minimum healthcare delivery perspective, and this bare minimum healthcare delivery is prevalent in many people I have met in India, who I know personally as doctors in India, who are not able to provide any healthcare, meaningful healthcare resolution to simply their friends or their own patients, because they are not interested only in solving these issues for their patients. And these kind of problems were there in US. That's why only healthcare administration came up as a course, because if the doctor doesn't want to deal with these ancillary issues related to patient access to care, related to delivery of relevant care to the patient, someone else has to take up that job, right? So that is why that job has been taken up by many allied healthcare professionals in US life. So while the doctor sits and prescribes something to a patient, the other people like a caseworker, like a nurse, like a pharmacist are the ones who help and enable the doctor in deciding what is the best case patient scenario for the prescribing that they are doing to a patient, or for the medications, and even insurances are involved in that picture. Because now imagine a person with only 30,000 salary and their insurance also might be covering something related to their healthcare, but if the doctor suggests like doing like 10 tests worth $5,000 each or $10,000 each, their cost can easily rack up just for doing those 10 tests. Their cost can rack up to $100,000 simply while doing the diagnosis stage of investigating whether something is wrong with the patient or what is wrong. When in PharmD course that I did in US, we have been taught that while you should rely on some diagnostic criteria to determine which is the objective evidence, because a machine is objectively observing what is going wrong, or a blood test is objectively supposed to prove whether something is wrong with you. Blood test, urine test, these are the objective evidences a patient will provide to a doctor, and the subjective evidence is all the symptoms that the patient is going through, where sometimes this patient could be having two disease conditions, and that's why mixed symptoms could be there. One disease is the major disease that they are going through, that's why you need a little bit of diagnostic help to and there could be some diseases with very similar profile of symptoms. So to distinguish between what is the disease the patient is actually going through, at that time it is meaningful to do a diagnostic test. But sometimes the problem with those diagnostic tests or over relying of diagnostic tests is that sometimes doctors are those people who over rely on diagnostic tests aren't really looking at the patient, aren't really observing the patient, aren't really ready to have the courage to create the discernment to understanding that what is it in the patient that their immediate symptoms are showing, that shows that they need immediate medical intervention. I have been actually in the last 4 years many a times in very critical health conditions, but the kind of doctors I have met both in my personal life and professional life are such who cannot even detect when a patient is anxious because they are not getting the right therapy, who cannot even detect when the patient is visibly coming to them in a near exhaustion state or near critical health status state. Despite that, they are giving them a clean bill of health. This has personally happened in one of my family's life, where they went to a doctor. They were going to fly because they had some health conditions. They always, whenever they are flying, they were getting they were trying to ensure that they get a clean bill of health from that doctor. So that general physician who sees them, or internal medicine physician who sees them regularly in their life, that person gave them a perfectly clean bill of health 1 week before they were flying. When after they flew, they were hospitalized for a lung infection, and now the family is falsely presuming that because they lived in a particular home life where in the home the conditions weren't supportive of their lung health, there was a lot of cold weather conditions there, that is what led to their lung infection, when the kind of lung infection they actually got, the severity of the illness that they got, means that the week before before they fell ill and were hospitalized, in that whole 1 week, that condition was actually developing while the patient was had indeed gone to a doctor to get a certificate from the doctor that they are in good health to fly. So, which is where the problem is, the doctor is not observing the patient or as deeply as they should, and many doctors are very mechanically doing their work. So even though the disease might have been, because if you're getting severely hospitalized, it cannot be that you didn't show the symptoms of that severe hospitalization weeks before, months before you got hospitalized. This is the thing I want to focus on, because this is a crucial intervention space where you can reduce healthcare delivery and healthcare costs of a patient. Because if, say, I get hospitalized and I have to suddenly severely ill and I end up spending $500,000 because of the hospitalization of a few days or a few weeks. That same thing, if 1 week earlier, 2 weeks earlier, 1 month earlier, if that developing infection was detected much before I got severely hospitalized, then much lesser healthcare costs would be necessary to cause an intervention for the patient. So instead of $500,000 cost, that same patient, if they were hospitalized, if their condition were detected sooner, they may not have had to go through 1 week of hospitalization, few days of hospitalization. They could have only needed no hospitalization at all, and just medication use and other interventions might have been enough for them to not get the severe hospitalization related criteria happen to them. Or they could also, even if hospitalized, instead of being hospitalized with expensive meds for 5 days or a week or 2 weeks, that same patient, if they were not severely ill, or if their diagnosis had happened sooner, that same 1 week, 2 weeks of hospitalization might have been cut down to only 1 day, 2 day of hospitalization and monitoring under a physician. So all these things, basically with healthcare, the sooner you diagnose a patient, the sooner you are able to detect what is going on in the patient with the patient is a better health outcome and a better medical intervention, and provides better health safety to a patient, because the more severely ill you are, more levels of supportive care are needed, more things are needed to bring the right supportive care into a patient's life, all of which add slowly in a lot of cost. And that same patient who was now hospitalized for 1-2 weeks in a hospital, after coming back home also they need post hospital care of multiple levels, which again can add to a patient's cost. Now someone who has in US $30,000 is a lower income salary, so a yearly salary. So with $30,000 salary, a patient cannot afford all these things. So even if they got some expensive medical intervention in a hospital, after that, if they with that medical intervention they went through in the hospital, if they go into debt, or after you come back home you go into debt and rehospitalization phases, are you actually helping meaningfully anyone? Imagine someone, and when you are that severely ill, you may also experience job loss. So that is the reason why there are so many people who end up with debts after a medical incidents, those who have had lower salaries, those who need a lot of recovery time, and in that recovery time they cannot focus on their jobs, and when they are not focusing on their jobs they can get fired in their jobs. And it's just that physically it's impossible for someone who was severely ill to also focus on many of their work related aspects. So that's why they end up getting fired possibly, or the work doesn't know how to support their healthcare costs, and whatever the reason, there are people who end up getting fired from their jobs. And if they don't end up getting fired, there are also people who will quit their jobs when unsupportive, disrespectful work conditions are present. And this is where I'm talking about respect in the workplace, because how do you develop respect? Is the respect in the workplace simply about the employee who is able to provide you the best possible, the most glory, the most number of awards, the most number of money they are bringing, or the most number of social contacts they are bringing? Or is it also about other levels of competency that they bring into the organization that is not clearly marked as the most of anything, but without which the company cannot function? So company culture, respect for the people who are working in your company, people who have worked in your company for many years and developed something in your company that is beyond simply awards, rewards and money, is important to make a workplace actually truly functional. And at that time, if someone who was maybe like a loyal employee, but simply because they needed 6 months of healthcare related leave, you fire that employee, eventually you will see the repercussions of a good employee leaving your organization. In my past, a couple of organizations that I have worked in, they have already either shown the trajectory of they are going to fail eventually in the future in the case of startups, because they were doing a lot of meaningless practices and futile practices, or in a case of a large organization, they were again showing signs of fracturing because they were not respecting good employees. They were not respecting the work of employees who tried to steer the conversation into the difficult topics that need to be addressed. Because when you work in a company for a long time, you also have can develop the capacity to understand what has been done right and what has been done wrong according to the people who are frequenting your pharmacy, the patient population that you are seeing. And I'm saying patient population because it was a pharmacy related work. So whatever business you do though, that will be according to that business you are operating or work you are doing. But people who work in any organization, be it in healthcare, be it in retail, be it in any other organization, the symptoms of like how in a body the symptoms of a disease can be prevalent in the body for months or weeks or years before that disease actually gets diagnosed by a doctor or detected by someone. The same thing is true of any system of work that we do, any family life related things that we do, any personal life related things that you do. The symptoms of things failing are always present in our past, and in the way in which respect or disrespect is falsely valued and falsely perceived as a major measure that should indicate that this is a good thing. I'll give you example also for hospital in India also. There were few years years back, there was this Fortis Hospital who were facing some litigation related problems in India. Why? Because, and in that why also, I only went to Fortis Hospital one time, and in that one time itself I understood how, and it wasn't, I don't know if that particular hospital I went to is also facing any current litigation, and this is an incident from many years back. But even in that one time, I could understand they were doing predatory practices that are not actually beneficial for the patient. So when a patient went to them, someone from my family had accompanied them in that hospital experience. They were experiencing back pain related issues. Now the back pain could stem from multiple reasons, and the way in which you resolve what reason that back pain is emerging from needs right kind of questions to be asked to the patient. But the doctor was least bit interested in patient history. He only listened to patient history of 5 minutes, and then he immediately just recommended, because these are the hospitals that are doing quick practices and they want to make quick money. So they just simply asked 3-4 he just started recommending these are the standard things that you can do for your back pain. And that simple 5-minute thing that he explained to the patient, because I am a healthcare informed person, I had already done that research work of for a back pain, what can a doctor in India or any other global doctor suggest to a patient when they have that level back pain. So I already knew the interventions he suggested, but in order to understand whether which of these interventions should be actually executed on the patient, in India many doctors like him do this thing where they the ones who are the predatory kind, and not just in India, these kind of doctors exist globally. They will what they did was they suggested 3 therapies which are standard therapies. The first one was medication related, second one was injection related, third one was surgery related. And the way he was talking, he is now like if you were an uneducated patient, a health uninformed patient, if you go to a doctor and a doctor tells you that you can take the medicine, but I don't know whether the medicine will work, I would rather recommend that you take the injection, he is not doing appropriate therapy. Because appropriate therapy involves, first, at least this is what I have learned as a pharmacist in US, and all pharmacy related, even my continuing education related courses that I have done as a pharmacist, all of them talk about these standard practices, that when you are at a beginning stages of detection of a disease, condition or illness, and you are in a beginning stage, the first interventions have to be the simplest intervention, cheapest intervention for the patient, and the best health outcome supporting intervention. So if someone is pre-diabetic and they are just or borderline diabetic, then you do not suggest medicines for a pre-diabetic or borderline diabetic patient. You suggest to that patient to take nutrition related interventions, exercise related interventions first, diet control related interventions first, because that will be more health outcome supportive for the patient. So that is the first line of therapy you have to practice on a patient. But if you do not practice, like when the simple intervention doesn't work, let's say the patient does a lot of nutrition related portion control, diet related control, is exercising according to doctor's suggestion, all of this, when it doesn't work, or the patient is unable to follow all of these interventions, or after following the interventions it is causing still the diabetic condition to continue, and maybe after a few months it is in fact showing up that more diabetes related symptoms have now cropped up in that patient, that is when you start medical therapy for a patient. And the same thing is as relevant for a diabetes patient as it is for a back pain related patient. So you have to first do the simpler intervention. So if it is a good doctor, the good doctor will suggest physiotherapy related exercises, simple self-care related exercises, which can help you in seeing whether your problem is a chronic problem or whether it is a beginning stage of a problem, which with preventative care you can support it easily and cause that disease condition to disappear. So now when you are at a beginning stage of an illness or a temporary illness phase, At that time, if that back pain is from a temporary damage that might have happened, that can get healed with rest and exercise or nutrition, that is what is the first therapy. And this, after doing that, if the pain is not going away within a few days, then the next therapy should be a medication that you take. If after taking, and that medication also, because the first medication that was suggested would be a simpler anti-inflammatory related medicine, just to see whether it is a simple inflammation that is happening, a simple pain problem that is happening. That simple pain problem, if it doesn't get solved, then you, next line of therapy is doing a steroidal dose. Now in the steroidal dose also, there is a oral dose you can take with steroids, the steroidal anti-inflammatory agents like corticosteroids. So with corticosteroids, you can either give the person a corticosteroid or orally, or you can do a injection dose. Now which is safer for a patient? Is it safer to take the oral dose, or is it safer to take the injectable dose? For most of the patients, oral dose will be safer. Injectable dose will be more risky, because if you don't know how to inject the patient in the right way, you can mess up the injection also given to a patient. So a good skilled personnel, if they give you an injection, it will resolve the problem. And sometimes if you have a bad skilled personnel giving you an injection, they can also mess up and complicate your health issues, right? So that's why injection is a little worse. And injection, second reason why it is a little worse intervention, is because injection being immediate, if there is any contamination also within an injection, that contamination itself can also have its own health repercussions. So this is also another aspect of understanding what is health safe to the patient, what is, and injectables mostly, because it is a direct application at a source problem at that time, because it immediately acts in a patient. That's why a lot of more health safety protocols need to be followed while manufacturing the drug, as well as while giving the drug. And a person who is getting that intervention also has to be more mindful that after getting the injection, if within a few hours or even within a few days, if they get certain kind of side effects, they have to monitor that. And this is another problem with medicines, side effects of medicines, where in India or majority of the countries, people do not understand and take that side effect related information seriously. So even if patients are given package inserts in US and in India also, if you purchase a drug, you may have a package insert with your drug. Many people do not read the information, do not understand that information, and assume that if you got a medicine, it is going to solve your health problem, which is not always necessarily true. Like if someone has a back pain, if it is related to inflammation related causes, then a medicine related to anti-inflammatory medicine will work. If your back problem is related to some other issue like a muscle issue or a deeper issue like cancer, at that time will anti-inflammatory medicine work, will all those interventions that related to physiotherapy work for you? No, many of the physiotherapy related things, many of the supportive health related things, nutrition related things may not work for you when you have something deeper going on, something more severe going on with your health. And at that time also, is surgery also the right intervention? Let's say you have back problem which is not getting resolved by anti-inflammatory medicine, it is not getting resolved by and if you do a MRI and all, and the MRI also nothing is showing up that there is a physical problem. Some doctors, if they are unethical, they will still falsely say that you have some problem and end up convincing you to do a surgery, because this doctor was going that way. He's like, these are the 3 things you can do, but I think you should either start. He directly wanted the patient to start with an injection, when the other primary care related stuff he didn't even suggest to the patient. Secondly, even in that injectable stage, when comparing even the medicine with injection, he said, oh, sometimes the medicine takes longer to work, this, that. So he's already like pushing the patient to take the injection. Now, if you are an ignorant patient, unaware patient, don't know anything about healthcare intervention related steps, and you are completely trusting your doctor blindly, you will go and say, okay, I want the immediate. And if you are really suffering from major pain, many people will want, I want immediate intervention for my pain. So they will immediately want that injection as a medicine intervention if they are in really severe pain, which is understandable. If someone is really in a severe pain, they will prefer the quickest resolution to their pain. But if you are really not in that severe pain and you are maybe in a moderate level pain, like your back pain is coming once a week or once a month, it is occurring to you, at that time there are definitely going to be, so the duration of the pain you are getting, someone could be getting once a week pain, someone could be getting pain every day, someone could be having pain every hour, someone could be having pain, constant pain of different thresholds. All these things are also important factor to ask a patient, but you don't ask that patient where is the pain emerging, which area of the body is it emerging. He didn't even examine the patient, because by touching the patient also, patient's body, you can understand, do they have a soft tissue related problem, muscle problem, bone problem. Why do you think doctors have spent hours and hours, years and years studying the human anatomy? If you're not going to understand a human's anatomy as to how the body will feel and look when a patient has some health issue related to a body part, that is again a false practice. And in modern medicine, I am yet to meet any doctor in India who is even ready to touch the patient's body to understand whether the patient has some, except for breast cancer patients where mammogram is done, where you are doing a breast examination, or in thyroid related conditions. These are the only places, or maybe a urologist checking for prostate cancer. These are the only 3 medical intervention doctors I have observed who are actually examining a patient, touching a patient's body to understand whether they do indeed have a growth or a cancer or something developing in their body. Otherwise, other patients with, if I have any other type of cancer in the rest of my body, if I have a lump developing somewhere, if I have a severe bone related distortion happening, like I have broken bones or spines, unless I am like obviously coming to a hospital with a broken bone, like I had an accident and the shape of my bones itself shows that my body is my bones are broken, at that time only a doctor is examining those patients. They're not taking the deeper examination necessary, and in those deeper examinations only, the way a touch of that area might feel can indicate to a patient or to a doctor what kind of problem they have. Like, do they have DVT related problem, do they have tissue cancer related problem, and not just touching that area, but of course touching that area where the pain is emerging, along with asking deeper questions, can bring about a better diagnosis for the patient. But that diagnosis can't emerge if you are practicing quick dispensation of a patient, and if you are doing 15 minutes of patient time, FaceTime only, if you aren't really asking the deeper questions, if you aren't ready to solve a patient's problem with the simplest way possible than complicating it, right? So if someone has minor level pain going on, for them that intervention of an injection is not even necessary. If you're feeling the pain once a month, once a week, the tablet would be enough time. The tablet will take likely 3-4 days to develop a threshold in your body and then immediately act on you within a few days, few hours, depending on what kind of tablet they are prescribing and whether that is the relevant tablet for your condition that you are going through. There are tablets, there are patches also that you can, pain patches also, but simpler pain patch. Again, you don't, if you are having moderate level pain, you don't start prescribing them a narcotic drug of the highest kind immediately in the first time the patient comes and sees you, or the first time the patient is experiencing some moderate level pain. If the patient has chronic level pain, again, in that chronic level pain patient also, which with pain related medicines, maybe I'll make a different video, but I will just this is a trend I saw in Utah where prescription drug especially related pain medication prescribing was extremely high in Utah, and there again the prescription rates, there were some illegal drug trade related problems going on there, the illegal drug trade related to legal drug related problems going on there. So that was one aspect of the problem that results in doctors continuously prescribing legal drugs for illegal purposes, because those patients, they do not really have a pain issue, they are going to now then distribute it in the market, in the black market. That is happening in one aspect. The second aspect is there are some legal patients also who really had legal genuine pain related problems happening. I have seen those pain patients in my profession. So those pain patients with legal pain issues, again, there are patients whose, when there's something related, I have made a video related to pain medicine. So your threshold to the pain medicine can increase over time, meaning if earlier I was taking 100 milligrams of a drug once a day, and slowly over 3-4 years the dosage has increased to taking that 100 milligrams twice a day, and then taking it 4 times a day. Now by the 5th year, what is happening is, earlier your pain was manageable with lower doses, but your illness is progressing in such a way. First thing is, either in that video I didn't talk about the illness progression, but I spoke about the threshold itself of the receptors necessary for that drug to act in your body. So at the time, if a drug is acting in your body where you have only a limited number of receptors in your body, so even if you increase your dosage, like, your pain is not going away, because your problem is not related to simply a simple pain problem that a narcotic drug can solve. So the narcotic drug will sit on a opioid receptor, and when it is sitting in a opioid receptor in your body, if all the opioid receptors that your body has is now occupied by the drug, because you're consuming that drug for now 5 years, right? So if you buy 5 years, a lot of your receptors are occupied by the drug, or all of your receptors are likely occupied by the drug. When all of your receptors are occupied by the drug, how much ever you take extra drug, it's like, if have you played musical chairs? In musical chairs, the opposite thing is happening. In musical chairs, you are slowly reducing the chairs where people can sit while playing the game. But imagine now, in your, those chairs are the receptors, and the people who are participating in the musical chairs is the drug. So now if there are 10 players and 10 chairs, you sit on each of the chairs, right? And let's say when you begin the game, there were only 3 players. So that is how you were when you are initially taking a drug. After a week of taking that drug, only 3 receptors are occupied by that drug. So 3 players are there in the game. But now over time, when your medication dosage was changed after 2 years, now after a double dosing of that medicine, now 6 people are now playing in the game. So 6 of them are sitting in the chair, and the rest 4 are still available. And so like that, slowly your drug is increasing in concentration, and once it has increased in concentration in 5 years and the dosage has been changed, if you have only 10 chairs for the drug to act on, but now whatever dose you are taking, if it is more than 10, and that dose is now 12 of that medication is there in your body, so 12 players are there and 10 chairs are there, 2 of the players will not have any place to sit. So what will that excess drug do then in your body? It will either go and accumulate somewhere in other organs where it has got no receptor to sit on, or it will get eliminated by your body. And this is the reason why people have drug overdose related deaths, because in that drug overdose related death, the drug is not simply acting now on an opioid receptor, it is accumulating in different organs. It is starting to cause organ damage related symptoms, which many people who were my prescription drug, like these opioid drug related dependent patients, they would also get what medication? They would also get ProAir, which is albuterol inhaler. So that albuterol inhaler they were getting breathing distress, respiratory distress. So in order to solve their respiratory distress problem, they were having wheezing related issues. Why was that happening? That is a side effect consequence of the narcotic they are taking daily, and to help with their symptoms, they are now getting these inhalers to help manage the symptoms. But what is that also doing? That drug is also accumulating in the body. That drug may falsely create an impression that you are not having a breathing problem, because the breathing tubes that are closing off or causing that wheezing or contraction, that is getting relaxed when you are taking albuterol. So you are easily able to breathe a lot of oxygen, but the distress and harm that is happening in your body from accumulated medications, not simply opioids, because it's not just that the patient is taking opioids, but they are taking opioids plus other medications also. So everything that is harmful is continuously accumulating in the lungs, and eventually many drug overdose patients, you will see, they will die as a result of having respiratory related symptoms, and respiratory failure can happen. But why is that failure happening? Because your body signaling system that this is dangerous medicine, do not continuously consume this high level of medicine. You didn't listen to your body's signaling system saying do not consume these medicine. Not just medicine, if you are, let's say, a drug addict who's taking both prescription drug and non-prescription drug, maybe you're also taking some inhalational drug as well, they both combined can give you that health symptom of respiratory distress. So multiple factors are involved in those people who are having prescription drug or non-prescription drug related overdose related deaths. But the main issue is, again, where the right healthcare intervention, is it a right healthcare intervention to continuously, if the patient complains to a doctor that after 5 years this level of medicine is not beneficial for me, what doctors start doing, after prescription A they go to prescription B, after prescription B they go to prescription C, or they give all three, A, B, C, to a patient. And if it is, even if it is a genuine patient or a drug addicted patient, or a patient experiencing increased pain because of whatever health conditions are there in their personal life causing them this pain, all of this doesn't simply actually need just medical intervention even for such patients. But there is a greater level of intervention needed, more mindfulness is needed, and for each individual specific patient, some individual specific things need to be resolved. So if you are giving the same, again, if there are only 10 receptors, so 10 chairs are there, and you are giving them 20 drugs also, meaning 2 different drugs now, again, if the number of receptors aren't only that many, how much ever you increase the dose or number of medicines that are opioids, is it going to resolve the patient's problem? No, it will not resolve, because the receptors aren't only there for the drug to act on the body, right? The number of places where the drug can act is limited. So after that limit has been reached, the body will show a lot of symptoms of adverse reaction and distress related to long-term consumption of a medication. And that is why you have to adjust the dose, change the dose, try a different intervention. When opioids are not working, switching from one opioid to the other, though it is a common practice in US, again, it is not a relevant practice. I'm sure there is enough data by now to show also that switching from one opioid to the other doesn't help many patients. What will indeed actually help is if you can meaningfully resolve what is the root cause of their pain problem. If their root cause of their pain problem is that they are also developing cancer, so getting that cancer diagnosis is more necessary. Or if their root cause of their problem is they were sexually getting abused by someone, which is causing them constant pain, their intervention needs them to get out of that sexually abusive relationship. If their root cause of their problem is a multiple set of things like abuse and past history of abuse or addiction related problems occurring in their body, that is where you have to you have to intervene to the patient. That is the right intervention. But if you are a doctor who is just wanting to make money, I will just write the prescription, see the patient for 15 minutes monthly, give them take money from them to write them prescription, you're not being a good doctor, right? So this understanding whether you are just going to a doctor who is only wanting to take your money and give you something as a temporary intervention, because all pain medications are temporary, all medications in fact are actually technically supposed to be temporary interventions, or only that much level intervention long term, as long as the medicine is beneficial to your health. But the moment a medicine that has been beneficial for you for even 10 or 20 years starts causing you side effects or health harm eventually in after 10-20 years of consumption, at that time if health harm is more, you're also meant to cut down the medicine, reduce the dosage of the medicine, adjust the dosage of the medicine according to the current health status of the patient, which doesn't happen globally in many patients' cases, or it only ends up happening when the patient goes and gets hospitalized. And I do know some family who have had these issues where their medicine dosage and because I don't talk to family like really often enough, after I call and talk to some family like once in their distant relatives, so I call and talk to someone 5 years later, and in that 5 years I knew initially that the patient had certain health conditions, and because of that certain health conditions, even though I have never visibly looked at the prescriptions that patient is taking, as a pharmacist with enough knowledge, I know what are the more commonly prescribed medications that person might be taking. So when the patient's caregiver was speaking to me and they are telling that this patient was having these symptoms before they were hospitalized, I was like, in those symptoms only I can easily tell that the symptoms that they were getting were related to the medications they were taking for their health condition. So those medications they were generally going to be prescribed even without knowing the exact medicine that they are getting prescribed. Those are the medicine's general side effects. So that medicine is most likely responsible for their health incidences that they were suffering through before getting hospitalized. Now, if any other person who is their doctor or healthcare provider monitoring that patient, they should also have that clinical competency. Like, because if you hire a nurse to take care of a patient, if you hire a doctor or a pharmacist like me is involved not in India, but a pharmacist like me is involved in a patient care therapy in a hospital setting for patients, or even in a pharmacy setting, if a patient comes and tells me that this is the side effect they are experiencing, then based on that side effect only, I have a legal, in certain states of US, I can legally now call the doctor and tell them that the patient has this side effect as a result of the medication they took, and can you change and adjust the dose or see the patient again for adjusting their dose, because this is how healthcare therapy works. This is the role of the pharmacist in US. But that thing where a patient or my advice to patients were this, that if you are getting this side effect, you should contact your doctor so that your dosage can be adjusted. That is where the intervention is happening. But if the patient forgot that instruction, then also they can sometimes come to a doctor and talk about their side effect to get their medications changed by their doctor eventually, or the dosage is changed by the doctor. This is what the doctor's role is, to understand what is appropriate patient care, that even after you have prescribed a medicine, and even if the patient has been taking that medicine for 10 years also or 5 years also, then also there is a time and place when their dosage needs to be adjusted. So, but even though they had regular doctors visiting that person, that regular doctor was not mindful. They even called, because of the side effects of the medicine, they called other doctors for other kind of interventions for treating the patient. But that other doctor also, their regular doctor also didn't pick up the fact that side effect from their regular medication use was happening. The doctor who came to treat at first at home life, doing some home supportive care practices, like they were a consultant doctor doing some medical intervention in the home to help the patient with their symptoms. At a time also, that doctor also hasn't done the due diligence to ask what kind of medications the patient is taking, what is going on with the patient, that apart from just giving the treatment that the doctor came to give, what else intervention that patient needs, which eventually in the end, despite two doctors now monitoring that same patient for a while, one doctor who was consistently monitoring with prescribing medicines, administering medicines, another doctor who came for temporary administration of a temporary moderate level health crisis manageable at home. Despite both these interventions, and what happened to that patient, they got severely hospitalized, and then they had to be taken to a hospital. That is when in the third stage, the doctor in the hospital who has this knowledge that I am talking about in this video finally that doctor realized that medications were responsible for their hospitalization, and those medication dosages need to be adjusted, and that is when they are finally adjusting the dose, which is a great and do you see how much of a healthcare cost now got incurred by that patient? And this patient been from having government health insurances, having also family who have enough of discretionary income to invest on their health care, all these interventions this kind of a patient can afford. Okay. But there are millions of patients who do not have government insurances, who do not have private insurances, who do not have doctors who can come to their home 3 times a week or monthly to come and take care of their health needs. There are patients who do not have money to afford such doctors or medical interventions. There are patients who also do not have, if severely ill, to have any family or any money to go to a hospital. So those patients, what are those patients supposed to do? For those patients only appropriate healthcare is that's why needed. That if you are poor, you cannot afford going through 2-3 doctors. If you are poor, you also cannot afford severe hospitalization. If you are poor, you cannot. That was the severe hospitalization was the 3rd stage. But the 2nd stage is what? Let's say in the 2nd stage something was detected for them. Even there are going to be many patients, not only those who cannot afford severe hospitalization or hospitalization related costs, and they will eventually likely end up dying or severely suffering until their body recovers from their illness. There are patients like that who could have been hospitalized, but simply because they don't have the money, they had to just live through the nightmare of their illness. There are also, and most of them do not live through, or those who do live through, there are also those patients who after hospitalization also the doctors have not realized what are the critical parameters related to their medication use, socioeconomic circumstance, life circumstances that are enabling their severe hospitalization. Those kind of doctors, I have literally family members who I know because of being a medical professional, healthcare professional with medical and medicine related knowledge. I know that their medicines that they are getting prescribed, the diet that they are following, the socioeconomic status that they have, all of this is driving that patient's poor health condition, which could be improved only when the right interventions are in their place in their life, where the doctors, the family, everyone involved in their health caretaking and providing healthcare delivery to them are all actually deeply, meaningfully, respectfully engaged in the professional work or personal work they are doing as a family. But if you do not, and the patient also has to take some caretaking about their health. So the problem there was both the patient is not taking care of their health in the appropriate way, the people who are supporting their health also are not taking care of their health in a mindful way, respectful way, understanding that sometimes medicine and food you're consuming can bring health harm if you're not consuming the food according to your health needs, if you're not taking the medicine and adjusting it according to your current health status, which has not been done by them. If they have been taking medications for 10 years, those medications are continuing without appropriate dosage adjustment or bare minimum dosage adjustment related to only very few criterias related to let's say if you are on a thyroid drug, and if the doctor knows for thyroid drug what dosage adjustment is necessary, only the thyroid drug dosage adjustment is being done, but the doctor doesn't know rest of the medicines you are taking, they also have to eventually be dosage adjusted according to current medical status. So this is the problem zone now, if a doctor doesn't adjust your medicine according to your current health status, and which as a result either causes a lot of extra expenses and a lot of extra caretaking in the home life when it is at a manageable level in home life, or is resulting in severe hospitalization when the manageability in the home life is not there for the patient. So like this I can and my own health is also like that, so like that I can tell about many patients, and in US also have met those patients, because those patients who cannot afford expensive therapy do end up coming in US to the pharmacy. In India also I've worked in a local pharmacy for a few weeks, and at that time when I was working in that pharmacy for a few weeks, even and that pharmacy was actually located in the poverty stricken zone, like a slum area of Mumbai. So near a slum area. It wasn't a official slum area, but more slum-like dwellers lived around that pharmacy. So they also come to the pharmacy only for the simplest intervention that is manageable with the most minimal medication usages, because they are not rich enough to even afford sometimes 100 rupee medication. So they were trying to get from the pharmacy 50 rupees, 10 rupees, 5 rupee medication for a temporary intervention of their disease. But what is more beneficial for a person who lives in a slum like area is not that they get that 5 rupees, 10 rupees medicine, but if they are getting stomach upset, if they are getting some flu like symptoms, their real medical intervention will be if they got good nutrition, if they had good access to food, water, clothing, shelter. Those are the interventions that are needed for someone that poor. For a patient who is not that poor, who is like in US, not that level poor patients were in my patient population group, but still, or if they were that level poor, they were on government assistance like Medicaid. But other than the Medicaid patients also, there is the middle section of patient population who doesn't go to the doctor because they do not have time. They will have job loss related problems, they will have they do not have that severe a symptom, they are at the minor level of a particular disease building up in their body. So they do come to the pharmacy for interventions related to minor level health problems or moderately manageable health problems. So at that time also, those patients are coming to the pharmacy because it is helpful for intervening at that level if you can manage in the right way the disease condition, and which doesn't simply include that they should take just a drug to solve their problem. So sometimes with those patients also, if the therapy that they need is not simply that you take this medicine, that is part of the therapy, but the real therapy would be if, say, someone has a skin allergy, as a person who is a pharmacist recommending something to them, if I can understand by asking the right questions why they are in that problem of skin allergy related problem or eye allergy related problem, because these are the over the counter medicines I could recommend to a patient. But if I understand deeply what is the root cause of their eye allergy, skin allergy, vaginal pain, UTI infection, whatever it is for which they have, I am legally allowed to suggest over the counter medicines. But other than over the counter medicine also, that is the part of my continuing education and knowledge, or pharmacy practice related knowledge or clinical knowledge, that what are the other things you have to do to ensure that this doesn't recur and flare up for you. So those other interventions that are also needed, the supportive, real meaningful care that is needed, sometimes pharmacists do provide that to a patient. And it's not just a pharmacist's job, but it is also a doctor's job, that when you give a medicine, it is not simply about the medicine you're giving, it is about the side effects related to the medicine, it is about the long-term use related to a medicine that a patient might have to take long-term, it is about a medicine that they might have taken for a long time and how it is now acting up on their body. It is also about for any short-term diseases and illnesses and short-term occasional problems. Again, if you do the deeper diving, true meaningful diving as to what is causing that health symptom or that trend of health challenge to emerge in a particular patient population group, that is a elevated level healthcare practitioner. And that healthcare practitioner can be a doctor, can be a nurse, can be a pharmacist, because that more deeper diving you do, more care filled and real respect for your work filled work you do, will drive you towards making these kind of interventions in a patient's life. But if you do not care about your work, you do not care about your patients, all you care about is making money, no one is going to ask the patient the deeper questions. None of the and that level doctors and healthcare professionals also exist. So do the patients who especially have financial crunches, are in socioeconomic distress, have a lot of problems where if I don't get the immediate right intervention, I cannot come, like let's say there's a domestic abuse related wife who goes to a doctor. Now can she, if she's continuously been abused by a spouse who doesn't and maybe it's physical abuse, sexual abuse, financial abuse, she doesn't, even for her to come one day to a doctor might be a big issue. Like after 100 days, if the husband is not at home, then one day and has gone on a business trip, that is the day when she will come for a medical intervention. And in that one day also, if that person with abuse is coming, or she has, because she's financially abused, she is taking 100 days, 200 days to save the money to now come to a doctor to pay for her medicine, even at the medicine, or even for an appointment. At that time, if you now do not give them the right intervention, correct intervention, immediate intervention that is necessary, are you really going to provide any meaningful care to a abuse victim? If they have broken bones, do you need to understand that this is an abuse victim from certain things related to that abuse victim's patient history and symptoms showing up in their body, to understand that this is an abuse patient? They may not, the next time they may come maybe another 1 year later. So at that time, if you don't give them the right and appropriate interventions and correct set of interventions and guidelines for taking care of their health, the next time the patient may not even come to you. The next time the patient, or if you start ordering, you do this test, that test, this thing, that thing, and didn't provide her the right interventions, and meaninglessly want her to come repeatedly, can that patient come repeatedly to you if she doesn't have access to finance, if she doesn't have the freedom to get away from her abuser, if it is a very hard thing for her to, challenging thing for her to even pick herself up from her, if you have broken bones, it's not very easy to walk with broken bones. So with those broken bones, if they're picking themselves up and going to the hospital for that 5 minutes of health care, at that time efficient delivery is also necessary, and you made that patient wait for 1 hour, 2 hour, simply because you do not have a operations person understand how to manage patient workflow. Are you being an incompetent organization? And it doesn't matter if you are making millions of dollars from the rich people, you're not delivering good healthcare to the poor people, the one in true distress, the one who needs immediate. Quality care is about that. Quality care is not about how fashionable your facility looks, or how glimmering and shining it looks, how polite your doctors are. Yes, it is part of the process, but that is not true quality care. I can if I need medical intervention today, if my doctor slaps me 10 times also, I will go to that doctor who gives me right medical care, than the doctor who will not even, with whom 10 times after 10 visits also he's not able to diagnose what is going on. So in US, because this criteria is used, how polite is your doctor, in all these healthcare surveys they ask this rubbish question. Not just in US, in business practices in India also, all these rubbish questions are being asked, and this pisses me off a lot, because a part of my work in healthcare administration was related to creating right questions about surveys, and idiots are creating these surveys who ask people how polite is your doctor, how polite is my doctor, is important when I am a luxurious patient, ultra rich patient, 10 times I have to go and see that doctor. At that time his politeness level will matter to me. But if I am a poor patient, if I am a patient in real health distress, if I am a patient with severe urgent care needed, interventions are needed, if I am a patient who has been chronically suffering from something no doctor has been able to diagnose, if I am a patient who is having these abuse related symptoms or complex life related challenges going on, for me it doesn't matter how polite your doctor is, how great your doctor is, the greatness of the doctor is, how quickly can he resolve and how appropriately. It's not even about the quickness. So here quick medicine is applicable, that the quickness shouldn't be about how polite they were, or quickness shouldn't be about how quickly in 15 minutes they resolve their issue, which is a customer service related issue in India and globally, as well as a doctor's service related issue globally as well, or doctor or any healthcare providers related issue. A real healthcare provider is one who doesn't solve your problem, who solves, if it is a solvable problem in 15 minutes, they should solve in 15 minutes. But if it is a problem that needs deeper diving, deeper questions, and it is needing 30 minutes of questioning for the patient, then it should be 30 minutes should be used to solve that problem. But if you are only measuring the metric that in 15 minutes the problem was resolved, you're creating a false set of metrics, because 15 minutes problem resolution limit is for which problems, which are simpler problems, 1 minute problems, 5 minutes the patient takes to narrate their incidents, 5 minutes the doctor asks questions, 5 minutes the doctor examines and writes a prescription. prescription. That is where 15-minute problem solving can be done. But if it is a deeper issue, chronic issue, long-term issue, a issue where they have already gone to 10 doctors and nothing has resolved, and the patient has also come with the medical reports of the past reports that have been collected, but then also there are many useless doctors who will, after collecting enough evidence is there, that evidence that shows that something is wrong with the patient, despite past evidence, they will now sit and waste time doing some more tests. No, I need new tests, even if the because they're not trusting 1 month old, 1 year old, 2 year old patient history. Why? If the patient has been suffering for two years, that 2 year old information is also as relevant for the patient as is the 1 month old report or 1 day old report. So you do new set of tests, but if already, find first in the old set of tests what is the clue pointing towards. If a clue is pointing towards cancer and you just do anemia test now, even after 2 years of a patient suffering through cancer, are you a good doctor? Or are you, and if you 15 minutes is all you took to diagnose that patient, you got your money, but in that 15 minutes the patient still didn't get their health intervention because they have cancer, and you are still looking at anemia because despite 2 year reports, not understanding a person with anemia in 2 years, a patient's body is very much capable of going through anemia related challenges and fixing it automatically without any medical intervention. This is another thing which pisses me off, that doctors have not realized why anemia symptoms, cancer symptoms are so similar. There is a reason why they are similar, and there is a reason where you can distinguish whether a patient has anemia or a patient has more deeper things than simply anemia going on with their health. And all those deeper things are present in their reports. It's just that you are not looking at the reports in the right way. And as a pathologist will know this better, as well as a pharmacy student who has studied pathology understands this better, that a deeper things are present in the clinical reports of the patient. But despite that, you need a MRI, you need a ultrasound, you need a Doppler, you need a FNAC to do biopsy to understand. Yes, you do need to give a confirmed diagnosis, but some doctors are completely clueless only about their diagnosis. So they will look all over the place for different things and suggest 10 things rather than understanding what is the cheapest thing or best thing or quickest thing or one thing that is only needed to actually give the right intervention to the patient. You don't need, that is where the quickness should emerge. The quickness shouldn't be the patient coming again and again and again to your clinic, to your hospital for 10 different tests. The quickness should be about how easily and effectively you manage the patient's workflow and diagnosis of the patient, as well as provided the patient with the right treatment. Like, I can go to a doctor in clinic 10 times, do 10 different tests, but if you are not able to pick up what disease I have from the tests you are suggesting, then how much ever I do 10 different tests, you will give me clean bill of health while I am sitting at home with cancer, while I am sitting at home with organ damage, while I am sitting at home with some severe illness, that you have not taken the time to look through the 10 tests also. Because if you are a really good doctor, you don't need 10 tests. You will only easily detect it within first 2 tests or 3-4 tests, or even the past test of a patient. That is what a truly skilled doctor will be able to do for a complex patient. And universe never will send a complex patient to a doctor who hasn't practiced for a long time. If you are a new and nascent doctor, you will see also. That is what I observed in my pharmacy practice. Initially, when I was getting patients, I was getting the simpler group of patients. I was not getting patients with some heavy problems, complex problems. Like, let's say if I am seeing a patient population with a lot of drug usage also, initially the drug usage patients were simple drug user, like prescription drug, narcotic drug usage patients. They were only getting prescribed control substance level 4 or 6. So that level patients were there, and at that level they were all genuine patients, most of them. But if I am meant to observe that there is a prescription drug abuse related problem going on that was related to my life purpose in understanding these, then slowly after 5 years, and the universe is testing like what kind of patient population am I able to understand and gauge their problems easily as a practitioner. So that's how I developed the skills of understanding like which kind of patients in now control substance 4 or control substance 3 or control substance 2, when I'm seeing that population group, can I cultivate the discernment of understanding which patient is addicted to that drug, which patient's body's receptors might have gotten used up because they have been using the drug for many years, which patient is not just addicted to the drug, might be selling it also in the streets, which patient is going through to a unethical doctor, which patient is going to a ethical doctor, which clinic is a ethical clinic, which clinic is not an ethical clinic. You can observe all of these from the prescribing patterns, prescription patterns, prescription picking up patterns, and also the visible symptoms of the patient itself, about how they communicate, how they talk, how they verbally, and in other measures. Because it's not, if you're taking a drug for a long time, again the drug's impact on your body will show up in some of your responses, because the drug is still there in your body. So like, the jitteriness, or I can talk a lot of things, but everything is connected, and you develop that discernment. Could I have developed that discernment the first year I started working in a pharmacy? No. After 6 years, 5 years of continuously working in that profession and continuously seeing a particular subgroup of patient population, that's when I developed that skill. On the first year, I didn't develop the skill of detecting different kinds of depression related problems. Whatever different patient population groups that were prevalent in my pharmacy, those patient population related issues and challenges, and discerning what is happening with them, is something that slowly only developed and I cultivated in my practice while doing that practice. And it is not going to be developed in anyone who doesn't have experience, who doesn't care for their patient. If I was a pharmacist who's only busy counting the pills and giving the pills to the patient, and that's it, and that's my job, that's my obligation, I give you the pills, I count the pills, I communicate to you the bare minimum thing, I will not be a good pharmacist. Then I have not developed as a pharmacist, I am doing the bare minimum. So my level of practice in the first year of practicing as a pharmacy would be same as in my 10th year of practicing as a pharmacy. But the one who is evolving in their first year to 10th year, every year there will be some improvement, some change, something which causes them to become better at a particular kind of thing they are doing in their profession. I was a more operationally oriented person, as well as observationally oriented and patient care focused person. So, and also in my, if you look in my LinkedIn profile, you might see I have written very decisive personality, and that decisiveness happens why, or analytical personality. The decisiveness and analyticalness is about this, that operationally how smoothly did I deliver what I was delivering to a patient, and did I effectively solve their problem, and not effectiveness measured by how many pills I in our pharmacy track records, most pharmacies, and that's why only a pharmacy eventually ended up, because our pharmacy metrics was tracking which pharmacy is, in order to even make some of their pharmacies be in the top ranking. The top ranking pharmacies were being calculated as a top ranking pharmacy because of the number of money or the number of prescriptions they are selling. But that doesn't again determine whether I am a good pharmacy. Like, in fact, if I am really a quality pharmacy, my job, if I have a Medicaid patients with 10 medicines, should be to ensure that Medicaid patient gets down to 5 medicines eventually, after having taken these medicines for a long time. Because many a times, and it doesn't matter if you are a Medicaid patient or any other insurance patient, but technically a good pharmacist or a good healthcare provider shouldn't be continuously piling on medicines, more and more and more medicines. Their evolution as a clinical practitioner should involve in the deeper level analysis needed to ensure that their health is manageable with the lesser number of medicines, lesser number of interventions. That is what develops a depth in any profession. This is, as a pharmacist, I'm talking about in a pharmacy delivery, what you are supposed to do. But it is equally relevant in everything. You will understand this in your, let's say, in a personal family life. I will tell you, like, let's say there is a marriage where people are always so much about love in this world, right? Because love is a key important element in our life. So when you see 2 couples or 3 couples, you're observing 3 couples over a span of, let's say, 10 years. In that time, if the couple which has really evolved and truly a good couple with each other is which couple? The couple that is able to resolve, like, all couples will have challenges related to maybe finances, arguments related to finances, arguments and challenges related to health issues, arguments and challenges related to social interactions. Everyone will have those challenges. Now, but the quality couple is which couple? The couple that is able to resolve their issues in the minimum efforts and understands each other intuitively and easily. That is the quality couple. The couple which is taking a lot of time to resolve their issues but still able to resolve, that is maybe a medium level couple. But the couple which will be the worst couple will be what? They are also going through the same challenges as the other two couples, but they are never able to resolve any of their issues. That is now going to be a toxic or abusive couple or conflict filled couple, right? So this thing and this skill these couples are developing over the 10 years of their marriage. So all three couples in the first 5 years or first 2 years of their marriage, they all might have had similar level problems, but the one that was effectively able to resolve their problem despite having the similar level problem is the couple which will be in the category of either solving their issues within a few years or solving their issue more effectively. And again, what will happen, like if there are three couples, one couple who's never resolving their problems effectively, who are continuously facing similar challenges again and again because they're incapable of resolving the issue, that is the worst couple. This other two couples, they also initially in the first year or first few months of their marriage and dating were experiencing similar issues. And then in those two couples, one couple took the time to understand each other deeply, and after understanding each other deeply, it takes them time to understand each other because they don't have an intuitive deeper connection to each other, but they are at least sincere in patching up things with each other. So they take maybe that same the first couple who's never resolving, this couple is occasionally able to resolve it in the first few years of their marriage. Same thing with the third couple also. They might have intuitively understanding about each other, but their time to resolve the issue also is going to initially, because they are new to each other, they will again take a few years to resolve those initial challenges. But now between the second and third couple which are trying to resolve issues with each other, again which will be a more quality couple, will again emerge only after 5 or 10 years of their relationship going together, where in 5 or 10 years, again in 5 years 10 years time, after the rosy phase of a marriage has happened, adjustment phase of a marriage has happened, now comes the challenge phase of people showing interest in you, or people outside influences trying to cause some problems, or you have now children and children related issues are cropping up, finances related issues are cropping up, some new challenge will crop up after 5-10 years of that marriage. And again, the one who is taking who are not intuitively connected to each other, or who are only moderate level intuitively connected, they will take a longer time. Again, after 5 or 10 years of marriage also, how they took 2 years, 2 months, 2 weeks to resolve their issues, after 10 years also they're taking that 2 weeks, 3 weeks to resolve those issues. Whereas a couple who is now becoming more efficient and decisive and intuitive towards each other, and are better quality couple for each other, that couple, that high quality couple, after 10 years of marriage, now that same problem that used to take them 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 1 year to resolve, now it will take them only 5 minutes to resolve. Why? Because while they're evolving as a couple, and you will see that couple actually will have more challenges also in their life, eventually in their life. So after 20 years now, if two couples are there, those couples who have now effectively managed their relationship very easily in the first 10 years of their life, in the next 20 years of their life, a lot of troubles also might come up in their life, because God is preparing them, because ups and downs are a natural part of life. And what is equally true about family life, couples, this can be true about a family dynamics also, this can be true about a work life dynamics also. This respect you are developing, this adjustment you are developing, this love you are developing, all of these are needing to be developed. Why? Because you have to learn how to ride through the ups and downs of life. So now a company where you have hired personnel who understand and evolved rightly in how a couple is evolving in the right way, a company also needs to evolve in the right way, whatever work you are doing. It doesn't matter, is it healthcare delivery, retail delivery, retail services, healthcare services, IT services, tech products, IT products, consumer good products. Everything needs the evolution, and the right evolution is not the again in that also, like And let's say there are two couples who seemingly you see there is one couple who is resolving their problems in 1 week, another couple is also resolving it in 1 week. But true resolution is when? True resolution is not the duration it took, also is not the true resolution, right? Because if say you think you have resolved the issue but you didn't even understand where the resolution had to happen, and your partner didn't understand it, or both of you don't understand it, you might both perceive that you have resolved it in 1 week, but the reality might be you didn't really resolve it. And that thing will show up when that same problem will again appear in a different form in a few months or a few years. So at a time, the one who is actually effectively resolving is not just dependent on the week time they took to resolve it, but meaningful resolution if they have done. Then if a meaningful resolution has happened within that 1 week, then again when that problem will crop up, you will meaningfully again resolve that similar level problem in the next level it has come up. Whereas the couple who thought they have resolved the issue but didn't meaningfully actually resolve the issue, again a similar level challenge when it will come up, it will result in their arguments and fights and worsen their relationship quality. So this is similar to work experiences also. If you are effectively resolving healthcare delivery related issues, then you are becoming a quality person. But if you are measuring two doctors and thinking that Dr. A and Dr. B both having been very nice to the patient and quickly in 15 minutes solving the patient's issue, did you effectively solve the patient's issue? If a person with, as I said, if it is a domestic abuse patient who will not be able to come only to your clinic, maybe their maximum times they can come is once in 6 months or once a year, like maybe that person comes to your clinic when they live in city Mumbai, but when they go and visit their family in Kolkata, at that time they have some financial access, so they are able to get healthcare access only when they visit once a year to Kolkata. That patient needs immediate and right intervention that one time they are going to visit a doctor. At that time they don't have the luxury of other people who are not abused to go again and again to the doctor, they don't have the finances to go again and again. That could be one patient. Another patient could be someone who has a cyclical job cycle. So if you have cyclical in your job, sometimes you have money, sometimes you don't have money. When you have the money, if you don't get the intervention at that time, that's it. When you don't have the money, you can't even go to a doctor to get that intervention at that time. So that can also happen. There could be a person who's a migrant worker, so they also need immediate and right intervention. And if you didn't provide the migrant worker the immediate and right intervention, and it was completely a wrong intervention, the next time they go to a doctor, all wrong patient history is now been recorded, because the doctor could have misdiagnosed the patient, the doctor could have partially diagnosed the patient. Like if you have cancer and you didn't detect that the patient has cancer, you have written anemia. Now being a migrant worker, you've gone to a different state of India or a different country, and there your records show you have anemia, when the reality is you actually have cancer, but there is no one who has diagnosed your cancer properly, because you are the kind of doctor who needs 10 patient visits to actually detect if someone has cancer. You're not able to detect a cancer patient within the first visit or first few visits. So this is the problem, and cancer is a difficult thing to diagnose sometimes, but cancer is also not that difficult to diagnose as well. If you're really an excellent practitioner, and you will not get the complex migrant worker, cheap healthcare delivery needing patient, someone who needs immediate intervention. These kind of patients you will not see in the first year of your practice. After 10-20 years when you have practiced, then universe will send you these kind of complex patients. But your evolution as that doctor in that field is only dependent on how quality you were, and not dependent. And there are many doctors I know personally in my life, and family also I know personally in my life, who are this way, who assume if they have resolved something in 1 week, or if they've spoken sweetly about something, or if they have resolved something in 1 day, one instant, 15 minutes, they are assuming that the problem has been resolved, when they are living in a great illusion about resolving anything. They are people who don't know how to resolve things. There are people, and different classes of people I have met. So those who do not know how to resolve something, those who mistakenly perceive that they have resolved something, when in fact all that was happening was the other person kept quiet and didn't say anything that this is not the right resolution, or the other person is telling them this is not the right resolution, but they are completely narcissistic and they will not listen only that what intervention they assume is the right intervention, and everything else is neglected by them. But all these neglect, ignorance, not understanding, not discerning, all of its impact eventually will fall in your life, how much ever you stay in denial, narcissism, or think that your solution is the only solution, right? So which is what the problem is with the healthcare delivery, and which is why when I said in the beginning of this video that many systems are crashing, they crash because of these reasons. When you don't have respect for your work, don't understand your work, don't understand mindfully what your work requires of you, don't understand mindfully that the given the set of patient population, like in Utah, is every pharmacy seeing the patients with controlled substance users? Yes, and that is why the track records showed that prescription drug use of controlled substances is rising in not just in Utah, in US population. It was rising in the few years I was working there. So when it is a trend for a community or a large scale city or a whole country, that is a massive problem related to now prescription drug usages that is cropping up there, and which needs to be now examined in the appropriate way. In India, where and it's a good thing in India doctors don't prescribe or diagnose any patients, because if billions of Indians will start taking all the crap medicines, wrong medicines, then you will lead to $1 billion worth of earth pollution problems as well. So crappy doctors exist in those places where if good doctors were existing there, good doctor and good, like when understanding about what is good medicine is not there, at that time it's better only crappy doctors exist. Why? Because for a real good doctor to exist in India, that doctor has to be practicing not simply how many medicines I should give the patient, how many tests I should make the patient go through, but just the right medicine and the right thing. That's it. That is what is needed in a billion populated country, in a densely populated country, densely populated city. Right intervention, the intervention that will solve the patient's problem meaningfully. And also, if your patient population has distressed class of population, how you resolve the population's problems with the minimal costs. And that is why, and anywhere when these are not getting resolved meaningfully is the place where healthcare systems start disrupting, healthcare costs start increasing and are not sustainable, the interventions being done are not appropriate, and are leading to imbalance in patient care, lack of right and appropriate access in patient care, lack of ability to discern what is appropriate patient care, what is quality patient care, which is a global problem actually in multiple countries of the world, which I, as a student of this healthcare things, knew about it almost 10 years back. And even though I knew about it, studied about it in 10 years, despite COVID having hit the world, this realization is still not hitting many healthcare providers. They are still going on the track of giving vaccines, when vaccines actually, if someone does a post hoc study or observational study of usage of vaccines in patient population, the vaccines related to the yearly vaccines that are being promoted currently globally, you will see those yearly vaccines do not have the same level benefit versus the kind of one vaccine that can last you a lifetime. Those vaccines that are given one time and gives you some immunity boost for a lifetime or for decades of your life, those are the really health saving vaccines, like the vaccines for tetanus, like the vaccines for many other illnesses, polio and things like that, smallpox, the things that got eradicated from the world. Those vaccines were the effective vaccines. But the vaccines that are continuously mutating viruses related vaccines, those are useless vaccines in the world. People do not understand it, despite data showing that what you are doing is harmful. People are not realizing it, and the only way you will realize it is with mass scale deaths, which happened with COVID. But even then, people are still ignorant about understanding the relevance of why mass scale deaths are happening, because there's multiple things, not simply things related to vaccine use, but vaccine delivery. The proper vaccine is also an injection, so like how a pain injection needs to be administered in the right way, medicine related to any vaccine that are injectable vaccines also need to be administered in the right way. Many other things also, patient specific factors need to be in place to administer a vaccine. Not every patient is eligible to get a vaccine, but there are doctors, ignorant doctors in India, who have written all these during COVID. That was driving me crazy, that there were doctors, medically educated doctors, who are saying cancer patients can get vaccines, when there are certain groups of cancer patients who can get vaccines if their immunity is in the right level. But if your immune system is not at the right level, you should not be getting a vaccine. But they don't care. The risk versus benefit aspect only doctors don't understand in India, despite thinking that they are doing a lot of studies about medicine, and generally the misperception in the world is doctors know more about medicine, when the truth is doctors are supposed to know more about how a medicine is responding in your body and how a patient is responding to the medicine. All of these are also parts that a doctor needs to know, but many doctors are not doing that healthcare delivery. That's why pharmacists have come up and pharmacy doctors have come up and emerged in US, because firstly, the pharmacists who were just general chemists earlier, those chemists were the ones who actually do the research work, who actually do the real years and years of clinical trials to do the pro and con, risk and benefit analysis of whether a drug should be approved in the market. And once the drug has got approved, whether they should be released in the market, whether they should be approved for use in a market, whether after use in a market, whether the drug should be withdrawn. All of these work are being done by whom? They are being done by chemists, chemistry students, pharmacy students, other biochemistry and pharmacology students, all these different ancillary fields, PhD students. They are also doctors, and they are doctors because they are experts in the field of work they pursue. So after being experts in the field of work they pursue, many people have this false perception that a PhD doctor doesn't have the same relevance as a medical doctor, which is a false perception. And not just about PhD or doctors, but a good doctor can be even a MBBS student with no higher MD degrees or MS degrees in doctory related fields. Same way, a PhD student can be a really bad practitioner of a particular field and be really bad in comparison to a student who's just a master's or bachelor's student, because again the level of expertise is not dependent on your degree. The level of expertise is the level of expertise you developed within the degree or work you are practicing. So the degree helps you in develop that skill, but some people without a degree also can have better skills than people with degrees. Or people, when there are hundreds of people with the same degree, again in that the quality person who actually meaningfully pursues that degree is very different from the person who may have the same degree, may have the same years of experiences, may get the same rating, may also be seeing similar number of patients, but still be a very crappy practitioner. So these differences, who can tell though? The crappy practitioners' differences can be told by those severely distressed patients, by those patients who never got the intervention or appropriate intervention, or got false intervention, or got partial intervention, and also the people who die under a doctor's care, especially if that doctor has been doing multiple things. Like there are things that are everywhere in the world, there are things that are forgivable for a while, but if you have gone to a level where it is not forgivable, because by then enough data has emerged, like let's say a doctor was there in 1900s where the general trend at that time was that tobacco was beneficial for health. And yes, tobacco is beneficial in certain patient population, tobacco consumption, and at that time those research data were not false. But what started emerging was there were a greater patient population who started showing health harm with tobacco usage. So when cigarette smoke is harmful for health related data started emerging after a few decades or few years. At that time, if you still persist in thinking that tobacco is beneficial for your health, and despite 20, 30, 40 years of data, is that doctor then liable to be sued, right? Because 30 years data is showing that cigarette is harmful for health. And when will they be not be liable for suing? When, let's say, if 100 patients came to them, and out of those 100 patients they were indeed getting a benefit from taking from having been recommended cigarette smoke for some reason, and it was indeed beneficial for them, then yes, that doctor who after 30 years also continued practicing and didn't cause health harm would not be likely to be sued. But if there is another doctor whose patient population, based on that old data, he said it's okay, you can keep smoking, but after continuing smoking they did indeed have a health harm, then some repercussions of that health harm is going to show up, and they have to start changing their practice. And how, if they are not changing their practice despite evidence showing that something is going wrong in patients who are smoking, at that time do they need some rude awakening to wake up to what needs changing in their field? And people also learn from other people's mistakes, so the one who is making the most mistakes, from them only other people will learn. The one who is doing the right practice, only from them you will now start learning. And someone 30 years back, when the data was showing that cigarette smoke is not harmful, but there was a doctor who is saying that it is harmful, 30 years back maybe that doctor was maligned and thought like to be a stupid doctor when evidence is showing it is beneficial. But if 30 years down the line, whatever he was saying why it is harmful is now enough data has gathered, is he now proved right, or is he a stupid doctor? So did his stupidity or competency depend on what other people were saying, or was his competency dependent on the patient population he was treating? So if he was managing to treat the right patients by taking them off from cigarette smoke, working on finding the right interventions for their health needs, he was practicing the more right medicine despite other doctors thinking he's a stupid doctor. Does that make sense? So this is what is going on currently with vaccines, currently with many kinds of healthcare practices, work practices, business practices, social and socio-economic practices in the world globally, where the people who understand the most where the problem zone is are going to be first, like how there are innovators in any kind of like with tech, you will see there are so many tech innovators where when technology is changing, the early adopters to that technology are first to adopt because they have the need for changing to that adoptive measure. So who do you think was the first to start adopting to an iPhone? Someone who doesn't know how to use those haptic devices or those button devices. They are the ones who were likely first adopting to a easily flowing iPhone. The others who do not want, those who have a problem, like they are maybe abuse victim and they have a problem, like because of their abuse they forget their things, and as a result they some days they will forget wearing a watch, some days they will forget taking their radio like the Sony what is it called, I forgot that CD player. Some days they will forget taking their phone. So they were having all these issues. But for them, being a victim of abuse, now if all three things that they need for comfort is presented to them in an iPhone, that person will immediately go, and they have the money to buy an iPhone. Will they adopt the iPhone? Because they now have to only remember picking one device while going out in their bus ride to work, rather than having three devices, one watch, one transistor for listening to music, and one phone for talking to people. Now all three are there in one device. They will adopt that device sooner. So do you understand that adoption was, or someone who is a busy working professional, they will also adopt, and who wants to minimize the number of devices they are using, they were also the early adopters. So the early adopters to anything works. Why? Because the thing that was new, thing that was introduced in the market was functionally helpful for many people. That was
was the evolution of all these different devices combined into one device. That's why it became a new innovative product. Even though the elements present in it wasn't innovative, it was still an innovative product. So this is how in healthcare delivery also, the right innovation in healthcare delivery is what is needed right now in this century. But in healthcare delivery, in business practices, in our normal life practices, in any element and field of work that is meant to shift in this century, in all of them that shift cannot transition or happen and will first get adopted by only those people who have the most trouble struggling with the past systems. For whom, so a person like me, why do you think I talk about, in one of my other videos I talked about energy healing, even though I am a pharmacist who earned money from selling prescriptions to patients, who has done research work by doing research work on chemicals, and even then I'm talking about chemical poisoning. Why? Because for me that is the greatest health harm has occurred as a result of these things. And why do you think I did the healthcare administration degree? Because at that time also I saw patients who had healthcare access related problems. I myself was a patient who has healthcare access related problems and has faced healthcare access related problems for multiple reasons in 2 different countries. I did a business degree. Why? Because as a consumer also, when I'm living as a foreigner in a different country, I do not get access to many things from my own country. So from the business perspective also, there were some challenges I faced there. When I came back to India also, from a business perspective, I will say again, business and healthcare perspective, there were other challenges that are present in India now for a person who has lived in 2 different country conditions. So that is why I have studied these things. That is why I have migrated to different countries. That is why I am narrating my experiences, because they are all relevant for me to either adopt something new or work on something new, or at least talk about all the problem zones, so that someone else who is more innovative about these topics is ready to truly resolve these topics in the right way necessary, than the false perception of a way in which they perceive is the way to change something. That's why I'm making these videos, because change requires you to shift everything or destroy certain things of the past, which a person who is very much in the comfort zone of a practice will not be able to do. So the doctor who was in the comfort zone of practice of prescribing cigarette smoke for his patients will not be able to do that. But a doctor who was more ready to address the patient at the level at which the patient is suffering their problem, doing the deeper diving necessary to understand why there's some health problem is happening to them, is the doctor who finally figured out, or a set of doctors or a set of research professionals and doctors and other healthcare professionals who were all in unison and in combination over the years able to shift the narrative about why cigarette smoke is harmful to health. So I hope this made sense. And similarly, there are people who are waking up to why vaccines are not beneficial always, which vaccines are not beneficial always, what is the reason for those vaccines not being beneficial and instead being health harming. There are people who have woken up to this, but they are now minor in number and people will not believe them initially. But when the time is right for the right data, but the data related to what needs to shift now with vaccine use is emerging. The data is already there. In 4 years, a lot of data, not just 4 years with COVID vaccine, a lot of COVID related data has come up. But prior to that, for other flus also, flu vaccine related data also has been collected, is present in our especially in US life, where other flu vaccines were also yearly being promoted for patients. So that data is there. It's just that someone has to analyze that data, someone has to discern the right elements presented in those data, and someone has to have the drive first to clear the mental block that what you perceived in the past to be the right intervention may not in the present be the right intervention for current health circumstances and life circumstances and challenge related conditions prevalent on earth. And this thing related to medicine is equally too related to any element of health delivery, any element of any work we do in our personal or professional life. I hope this was informative. If anyone has questions, comments, wants further to explore any of these topics that I have discussed in this video, please drop comments. Or if you want to get in touch with me personally, you can try to get in touch with me with my social media pages that I have linked in my description of my profile. So again, I hope this was informative, and I am hoping that whatever level of work you do, whatever level of personal or professional life challenges you're facing currently in your life, understand that there is always a reason and purpose for that challenge to crop up in your life. Each of those challenges, I mentioned my personal problems because those personal problems are, and the things, when I say I'm pissed off, doesn't mean that I have that piss off is necessary, because if you get that piss off via something that is not working for you, then only you will want to resolve it. So some people getting pissed off is necessary, some people understanding what is the problem is necessary, some people who don't get pissed off is also necessary, so that they can coolly and calmly now change the things towards resolving it in the appropriate manner necessary. But if you are those kind of people who are like live and let live, whatever has worked for last century is also going to work for this century, are you going to be able to shift and change the narrative where changes are necessary, where changes are needed, where a percentage of population's needs related to health or safety or finances or security or life conditions, socioeconomic conditions are not being met? And that's when change always happens in that category whose needs, and that is a large category whose needs are not being met, and that's why the change is necessary after a while. And the symptoms of the change being necessary has been prevalent in our lives for at least a few decades. It's just that even though the symptoms of those changes being necessary have been present in our life, people do not understand it, and those who do understand it, they will face a challenge during the time when majority people are not understanding why that change is needed. So again, I hope you all this made sense and this was informative for you, and have a great day.